Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Marriage. I'm your host, Melanie Studley.
What's up, guys? My name is Seth Studley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, we're talking to Karissa and Adam King of the Dear Young Married Couple podcast, and we're going to be talking about the importance of spirituality and the role that has to play in your marriage.
All right, let's go.
All right, guys, what's up? Welcome to Anatomy of Marriage podcast. We're super excited to have Adam and Karissa King of Dear Young Married Couple podcast. What's up, you guys?
Hey, we're so excited to be here. We love what you guys do, so we're glad to be part of it.
Right
Awesome.
on. We got to visit a little bit because we came on your show, and we also did some, pre-production talking. So it feels like, okay, getting to know these guys. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Y'all are rad.
Which is really cool. And we love what you were doing. So if you could just introduce yourselves individually, and then, of course, coupled together and what you guys are doing now.
Sure.
My name is Adam King, and we are a coach therapist team. I'm a coach. My wife is a therapist. And for the last, 3 years? Well, we've been married for 12 years and almost 13.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good job, babe.
I know. I'm looking at my wife right now going,
Did I get it right?
am I right? And so we started about 3 years ago, started a podcast, Dear Young Married Couple, which was an outgrowth really of a lot of the coaching we were already doing because we were involved in ministry in our church. I was a youth pastor for a while, heavily involved with music, was a piano teacher forever. And so, that kind of stuff goes together.
Mm-hmm.
And founded Dear Young Married Couple, which is kind of why we're here today and why we met you guys.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm Karissa, and I'm a marriage and family therapist for about 10 years now. And we have 2 kiddos. They are, our son is almost 2, and then our daughter's
say they're
3.
wild and crazy.
And they're wild and crazy, which makes life so fun and crazy. We love helping couples get intimately connected, get adventurous, and find purpose. And so those are our 3 core tenets of Dear Young Married Couple. We take couples out on Jeep retreats for 2-on-2 intensives. We love that part of what we do. We take them out backpacking. We do a lot of marriage retreats. We're all over the world speaking and empowering couples through healing, through growth, and love that part of what we do. And then we see clients here in Sacramento online now since the pandemic, but
all over the world.
All over the world. And that's our 9 to 5, and we love that as well.
That is awesome.
I knew that you guys were down in California. Where did you go to school? I'm just kind of curious, nerding out on marriage and family therapy stuff.
So at Sac State first, and then transferred when we were youth pastoring up in Oregon to Eastern Oregon University. And then I am now almost finished with my PhD in theology at Assemblies of God Theological Seminary.
Wow.
Holy
That's
cow,
awesome.
that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot of schooling. Highly educated, which is great. So when we really like it when we interview couples who are really passionate about marriage, and then also bring that education kind of academic based stuff in there too, because it's like, okay, this can be a science, and there's tons of good research out there. Doctors John and Julie Gottman, and 1,000 other people. So we really like that aspect of it too. So let's dive in. This might be a little bit of a different conversation, but it spurred from conversations that we have. It seems like they keep on coming up and up and up with our coaching clients about the power of spirituality, but not only spirituality, but so we're Christian. I know you guys are Christian. So we have a worldview through that lens, but it's also a little different because I've just had different experiences of travel and different communities I've worked with. And I come from the South, y'all. It's like, okay.
Bible Belt.
Bible Belt, South Carolina. There's a church literally on every corner.
Right.
And it was very black and white. But in my move to Seattle and all this other stuff that I've done, it's like, hold on, wait a minute. This stuff is gray, and it's still very, very powerful and relevant.
Right.
In not only just in the Christian aspect of it, but there's something bigger than us, right? Yeah. And so I'll probably use a lot of different language. And if you guys are like, I don't really subscribe to that, that's fine. It's just a conversation. But we found the need for that and the need to talk about it and be very vulnerable and open and upfront about it with our coaching clients and the benefit that comes from that. So
and it's just, again, it's something that keeps coming up with our clients and then in our own lives too. Like when we walk away from, or even sort of drift unintentionally away from this, like a faith-based, prayer-based model, a higher power or a God-centric model, whatever that looks like, we find that stuff falls apart. So it seems like y'all are the two best people to talk about with this stuff. You said you were sorry earlier, Adam. No, you said you were an apologist.
Apologist. Yeah.
Apologist. Yeah. Talk more about that, actually. Talk about your theological side of things. I don't even know what the right word is to say.
Sure. So I'm a Christian. And I said an apologist.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that I'm sorry, even though sometimes I need to apologize. But it comes from the Greek word apologia, which is found in the Greek New Testament. In 1 Peter 3:15, it says, be ready always to have an answer for every man that asketh the reason for the hope that is in you. The word there, have a answer, is the Greek word apologia, which means a ready defense. So be ready to give it, not just I believe it, but like, well, why? Why do you believe what you believe? Give me the reasons why. Is this founded in reality, or is this just wishing upon a star? Is this, equivalent to believing in unicorns and dragons? So that's part of the apologetic training. So just to give you a little bit of insight, I have my bachelor's in philosophy from the University of the Pacific, and then I have a master's in apologetics
from
Biola University in SoCal. So it's great because I don't often share this background because, we're very much focused on marriage and personal development. And with our clients, I always try to find out very quickly if they're a Christian or not. That way I could pull. And here's what I mean. And I think this is why you guys are bringing it up. It becomes a very central issue if we do have some sort of moral compass to work from. So here we go, some philosophy. But Dostoevsky said that without God, all things are permissible, meaning that there's no objective morality that points us one way or another. And I think Hume made this really good point. Okay, now stop me if I get way too deep, but
oh no, it's good.
It's called Hume's guillotine. He says you can't get an is from or an ought from an is. So we look at nature, and science says that science just says what is, but not how we ought to use it. For instance, science will say this poison in my grandmother's tea will kill her, but it won't say whether I ought not to do that or not. And of course, people like Sam Harris and some people might argue, but it's very difficult to get that ought.
Right.
If we ought, do it. Now, why go, such a gruesome analogy, Adam? I don't know, because it sounded cool. No, John Lennox gives that one, so I stole that from him. But with coaching, it's very difficult to say the wife, just to give an example, doesn't like her husband looking at pornography, and they're not faith-based. And that really, she feels degraded, she feels an object, she feels all this stuff. But he likes it. How do I tell him no? Well, your wife doesn't like it. Well, he does like it. So it's just kind of a standoff, right? And these are the kind of situations that we get to in the counseling office that really becomes kind of a push against the wall. Who's going to cave?
Right.
And when I don't feel like caving, what then? What's going to keep this person in a helpful environment, or keep our marriage in the way that we could both agree on? So what's happening is they're not shared values. And that's a very difficult place to have in a marriage.
And John Gottman, he's the foremost researcher in marriage. You guys are familiar with him. He's up in your area. He has done a lot of research on this area, and it comes down to the dream behind the conflict. And so we're both Gottman trained. We do a lot of this work with couples, and the dream behind the conflict has to do with your values system. It has to do with your experiences, your trauma, but it has to do with your values system. And if you can get to the top of Gottman's house, which is the shared meaning and purpose, and you can come and you can align your values, then you're going to be a lot more fruitful as a couple. You're going to get to what we talked about in the podcast we recorded with you guys. We're going to get to that zone of genius when you can align your values. And so if you can't actually have a shared value around a certain topic, such as pornography exposure or a parenting issue that you're trying to work through, and you don't have the ability to come alongside and figure out where do we share value here and how does that link to a bigger meaning and purpose outside of ourselves, then it just becomes about compromise, and that's pretty shallow.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that you talked about the shared values. We also talk about a shared vision, and we have to establish that fairly quickly with new couples, because if my shared vision is, I want to be, I don't know, an ice road trucker and be gone 3 months out of the year. I don't know why, that just was random.
Really weird.
But I want to do that. It's going to make money and I'll see really cool things.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. That's not my vision for a marriage, Seth. That doesn't work. Well, okay, sorry. So obviously we're going to have some conflict there. So we have to have that type of, I guess, beacon, like pinnacle, like, okay, that's the Mount Everest. I'm looking to that. You're looking to that.
Right.
When stuff hits the fan, okay, hey Mel, remember this up here? Let's go to that.
Right.
So that is of
good.
utmost importance.
Well,
So how to tie that back into spirituality? Oftentimes, because we really work from a biopsychosocial spiritual model, because that makes us up. That's
Right.
You know, that's who
That's
we
right.
are as people. When couples have different views or versions of spirituality, that doesn't mean that it just doesn't work, because a lot of couples have different views on spirituality. But when we can identify that, that's what we go towards. That's what we can work from. So in your guys' experience, and I know we'll bounce around here, but what do you do in a term of like one couple was raised Christian, one partner was just not, and they sometimes make it work, but sometimes don't. How would you guys address that in that way?
Yeah.
I'm looking at my wife.
So, I mean, we've had couples like that. And just to be quite frank, we don't have as fruitful outcomes unless they are willing to explore something deeper. So if they say, no, I'm staying here, this is how I was raised, and the other person says, nope, I'm staying here, this is how I was raised. For one, that's going to create a lot of conflict, just in their marriage. But then two, what happens when parenting issues arise, right? So unless they're willing to go deeper, unless they're willing to explore some of the apologetic side of things and figure out like, why should I believe this new set of values? Why should I, totally devote my life to this new system and this new way of life? Unless they're willing to go there, it's just not as fruitful of an outcome. Like I said, we can work on compromise. We can work on, boundaries, and we can see improvements, but we're just not going to have that depth and that freedom and excitement and the safety and the adventure, those two, diametrically opposed values that we all yearn for. We want to feel safe and secure, but we want adventure and risk. And you can't get both of those unless your values are aligned.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a really good point.
And that makes me think of the weirdest analogy, but just go with me here.
Okay, let's go.
Because I agree with you on that. We see the same thing with our own clients as well, is that when there isn't a shared faith, it's very hard to find the sort of ought in it. You're like, well, I mean, I can, but what should I do kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the analogy or the image that came to my mind as you were speaking was like salmon. So we live out in Seattle. There's salmon everywhere. They run in October. They come up the rivers and they come from the ocean. So salmon go out into the ocean and they find their spawning ground. They find the river in the section of the stream that they were laid in eggs style. What do you say? They were laid as eggs, and they go back to that because it's in their like it's a higher purpose. So imagine if a salmon didn't have that higher purpose, that higher like spawning calling, it would just swim around in the ocean and then it would just die.
Right.
Like it wouldn't come back to the core of what it is. I know that's the weirdest analogy ever.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? There's something deeper that drives its behaviors, drives its motivation, drives why it does what it does. And that's sort of the analogy that I'm drawing of when we have this, and it doesn't need to be a shared faith necessarily. We can have interfaith marriages, totally fine. But we have to figure out what is our shared like morality or our shared desires of, I don't know, because you're right. When parenting comes into play, holy cow, this like everything just falls out the window at that point. So I think that it's something I really love that we're talking about with you guys especially. Is there any examples that you can think of with clients? Of course, not like their names or anything, but like clients where you once you tapped into that higher power, spiritual faith part of it, then everything lifted up to it. Is there anything you can share?
Yeah. Well, and actually to tie it back to your salmon example, we don't want to throw away our origins, regardless of your likes and dislikes. So, you might look at your family of origin and say, here's what I really want to repeat from my family of origin. Here's what I don't want to repeat. But you don't throw that away entirely, right? So you want to go back to that spawning ground and say, like, here's something I really value from my family of origin. Maybe it's relevant to religion. Maybe it was a tradition. Maybe I have a couple where, they're Christian and she grew up Jewish. And so they still celebrate Hanukkah. It doesn't contradict with their Christian lifestyle and their beliefs. And so this is a tradition that she really values growing up, and they celebrate Hanukkah and they enjoy that tradition around the table for those nights leading up to the last night of Hanukkah, and they light the candles and they have the gifts, and it's a beautiful tradition. You don't have to throw that away just because you're not going to practice your Jewish faith anymore.
Right.
And so I would say differentiate between culture and tradition versus faith and religion.
Oh, that's great. Talk more about that.
Go for it, babe.
I think you set that up great. That was your candy stick.
Well, that comes up. I mean, no matter, even if you think you come from the same religious background, like say you grew up in the same church, right? You're still going to have different cultural upbringings.
Yeah.
And
I think the biggest question here is to ask, what from my family of origin do we want to repeat?
Yeah.
And what from my family of origin do we not want to repeat? And this is just being extremely intentional. It doesn't matter if you one person's from Africa and another person is from Europe. You could have people from the same town but completely different cultures, right?
Right.
So just asking those questions, being very intentional about it. Like we talked on the previous episode, Melanie, when you were saying that, my family were huggers or not huggers and not very outwardly affectionate. And maybe Seth, yours were. So, just
That's
right there, that's a
thing,
cultural
right?
difference.
Right.
Yeah, we see that in different cultures are more huggy and more but you're still were very different. So I think being very intentional with those kind of conversations that are not in the moment. You didn't just hug me. So I'm angry. I'm frustrated. You could have hugged me and just ended this whole argument, but you didn't and walked away. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
So if we don't have those conversations in the moment, but be very intentional about having those, maybe on a road trip, maybe over coffee, and continually asking those things.
Yeah.
But so these are kind of like some of the fears I think that people have. Like my parents, my grandparents, all my family are from this tradition or this maybe religion, and I fear dishonoring them for changing religion. And that is definitely a fear. But to like kind of what you guys are saying, if you marry somebody though that's from a different religion, then and there's that, or maybe someone's an atheist and there's a religion there. Like there are lots of differences here, and or maybe you're dating somebody. This would be the time really to see, if there is open-mindedness to seeking out truth, because that's really, I think, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian not because I was raised a Christian, but because I believe that there are good reasons to believe that this is true, that Jesus rose from the dead. I was actually there, not to get way into my story, but I had kind of a crisis of faith in school, and I was ready to walk away. Like, hey, if this isn't right, even Paul, a writer of the New Testament that wrote a lot of the letters in the New Testament, which means the last half of the Bible. Paul said that if Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, then we are of all men most miserable, talking about Christians.
Right.
Then we're just like, believing on nothing. And that's kind of a sad thing to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm encouraging, don't make your changes just based on fear, or maybe not make changes just because, I don't want to anger anybody. Make your changes because, well, first of all, maybe the impetus will be so maybe we can be on the same page, but maybe have a more open mind about, is Christianity true? And I know I'm using a universal there, but there are things that are true and there are things that are not true.
And search that out. Look at the evidence. So like when we were dating, that was actually when Adam was going through this crisis of faith.
Sorry, hold on. His phone just rang.
That's okay.
You silly person.
Is this okay, guys? I know this probably is like way different than normal, right?
No, this is perfect.
No, it's perfect.
This is awesome. So say that again. Sorry, what were you saying?
When Adam was through crisis of faith.
So when we were dating, Adam was actually going through this crisis of faith. And I was working at a Christian bookstore. And so I was like, well, I have the book you're talking about. He's talking about Josh McDowell, and it's like I have that. I see that book on the shelf here. I was like, let's both get a copy of that book and let's search this out together. Like, let's.
The book was Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Yeah, so it was the first book that we read together. We both had a copy, and we were highlighting and asking questions. We were searching this out, which is what Paul said that. The Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they questioned Paul. They decided, I'm not just going to listen to you and believe that what you say is true. I'm going to search the scriptures to figure out that what you're saying is true. And that goes not just the scriptures, which is special revelation and theology, but looking at general revelation. Like, what does science and philosophy and archaeology have to say? And so we did that research together, and that strengthened that gave us such a foundation for our marriage. And had we not done that, I don't know like how our marriage would have turned out, because that has been such a foundation to who we are and what our marriage stands for.
Because now I was just gonna say, now it gives us a moral compass.
Yeah.
That says, because I believe that there's a God, because of good arguments, and Jesus rose from the dead.
Because of good arguments.
This is why I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And so, because I'm a Christian, then I have these sort of moral norms that husbands ought to love their wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself for them. And wives ought to respect their husbands. And so I have this...
Not in a doormat kind of way. That's an Ephesians 5:33 reference.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, remember that the husbands loving their wives is in a self-sacrificial way.
Yeah. Right. Serving.
So when we have this model and we have a kind of a guidebook to go from, we have a norm. We can have a norm to look at and go, okay, I need to work on this.
Yeah.
And you need, and
I need to work on that.
Yeah. Right. No, I love that. And it's interesting because for me, that is this, like, I became a Christian at 19. Before then, I did whatever I wanted, didn't care. I was raised Catholic, but zero cared about it. Okay. And I felt like, so going back to that, like, dig into these questions. Don't just like believe whatever. Don't not believe whatever, but dig into them. Because from my perspective, when I became a Christian, it felt like, this is the analogy I use all the time. Like, God was just like, and knocked me off of my feet and was like, you're going to be different now. And I'm like, what? And so everything was different. So I had to question everything I did because everything I did before was not ideal or great or life-giving. And so from my perspective, faith was, what would the word be? It was very inconvenient. I lost all my friends when I became a Christian.
Oh, yeah.
And I did not have people saying, you need to become a Christian and you're a sinner and you're blah, blah, blah. Like, it was just on its own. It happened. And it was the weirdest thing ever. And so I follow it because of how it presents itself to me.
Sure.
It's so much bigger than me. It's not a person saying, you need to do this and you're bad and you're that. And if you do this, you'll be good. You go to heaven. Like, that's not my jam at all. That's not why I'm doing this. And so I love that you say, like, dive into it, look into it, understand the truth and understand that stuff.
It. Like you said, like sometimes we lean too far to the side of like evidence, right? Where we aren't interested in that experience, but God offers relationship and experience. So you have to seek that experience out too. So that's actually one of the questions we recommend couples ask each other when they're dating. So we actually, we'll talk about this maybe later, but we created card decks because we saw the need for this. And one of the questions in one of our card decks is what was in our realizations, what was a landmark spiritual experience for your partner? And so we want you to know that about your partner before you marry them. Like we want you to know what was their upbringing, what was a landmark spiritual experience, not just did they search out their faith, what's their relationship like with their pastor, that's important, but what was a landmark spiritual experience for them? You know?
That's really cool.
I love that question because it's like that example that you guys.
Can we ask each of us that?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna get to that. Like the really galvanizing experience that you guys had. Like you were both reading this book together, and you said, "Yeah, I don't know where we would be if we didn't have that." So that is just real proof that the power of spirituality in a marriage or in a relationship is so important. But I'm gonna go Berean on you guys. I guess, right?
Let's do it.
Right, but then just really ask and have a conversation because I didn't have some crazy experience like Melanie did. You know, like I said, I just there's a church on every corner. We went to church. Okay, it's what you did, and it was all like very black and white. Do this, you're fine. Do this, you're not fine. And then even culturally, you're like, do this, you're fine. Do this, you're not fine. Well, wait a minute. How does that intersect with spirituality? And this cultural thing that you're talking about literally doesn't even matter. Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's like unlearning all that stuff. And
well, and I think it's important to say that our experiences with faith are very like they could not be more different, but we are both Christian. Like, so even just how I was introduced to faith was so different than how he was introduced to faith, right?
So in your card deck, which I love that question. I've never heard it posed that way. Like what was a really kind of formative spiritual experience that we can talk about? So what if I have a different definition of spiritual experience than Melanie does, you know, like, because I really do question a lot of stuff. I think I did that even before I moved to Seattle. All this stuff. It's like, okay, wait a minute. It's not just black and white. There's so many other different experiences and not just like in a pluralistic kind of way, like do everything. Everything's fine, you know, because like, you know, what Paul says, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
What if Paul didn't say that? Don't say it in front of them. What if you're wrong?
Did he say that?
Did Paul say that?
He did that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Woo, high five. You got that one.
I'm a biblical scholar.
Oh, wow.
Anyway,
he's hitting it out of the park.
Right. But so I can do anything, but not everything is beneficial.
Right.
Like we had a conversation. Like there's this French bakery in Seattle that I absolutely love.
Okay.
And we can afford that. I can go there 2 or 3 times a day if I wanted to.
Could.
Right.
Yeah.
I can do it. Who cares?
Sure.
That's not beneficial for my heart, my cholesterol, my waistline.
Right.
Your wallet.
My wallet.
It's expensive.
Right?
You got it.
I really like looking at it that way. So
that's good.
How would you guys address, oh, wait a minute. Okay, great question from the card deck. My understanding and version of spirituality is different.
Or a spiritual experience.
A spiritual experience or like even the definition of spiritual, because that's different for everybody. So how would you guys address that in a way?
It is, yeah. So first of all, both of your spiritual experiences have value because they're part of your journey, leading you to more that God has for you.
When Jesus says, knock and the door will be open, seek and you shall find. You're like, he's talking about, you know, if you're on this journey and you're seeking, you'll find.
Yeah.
So I think that I was just tagging on what you're saying. You will find if you're looking for evidence or God or experience, I feel like God will lead you toward him.
Yeah.
If you're honest in your seeking.
But some people aren't seeking, right? They're kind of closed off to that. And so that's key, is if you're seeking, you will find. And now that you're joint, whether you're, you know, intending to get married, you're dating, especially if you're married, you're now one flesh. And so yes, you're differentiated, you know, or not kind of touching on that piece, but seek spiritual experience now jointly. Have your own walk with God, have your own experiences. That's going to express differently. Whoever's more of an artist is probably going to have more of an artistic, creative, spiritual experience. And the person who's maybe more of a logician will have more of an evidence-based experience.
And tagging with that, another verse, since we're on the Bible thing. Jesus says, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart which is a matter of the will, mind, soul, and strength.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's our whole person. So the artist, I'm an artist.
Yeah.
The artist, yes, he's very, it's funny, but I guess I have the dual realms going on, but the artist can be very like ethereal and, like kind of woo-woo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And never go into the logic.
Mm-hmm.
The logician can never seek the spiritual or the experiential. And I think both lose out on the full experience of what God's calling them to.
If you don't seek the other. So when you can, and not saying that both of you are going to be in that, like some couples, you might both be artistic and, more right brain versus left brain or vice versa. But in a lot of couples, we see that one person is more right brain, one person is more left brained.
Right.
And so they're going to tend toward evidence or experience. But if you can come together, I mean, the Bible says one can put 1,000 to flight, but two can put 10,000 to flight. So, and that goes not just for like people that you're, witnessing to or sharing the gospel with, but it also goes for like creative work that you do, a business that you create, a ministry work, a humanitarian effort. If you can come together and join forces, you can put 10,000 to flight. Like that's so, it's exponential power. And so if you can seek out a spiritual experience together, and we're huge advocates of this, pray together. Like for some people that is so awkward. They're like, what do I say in front of my spouse? What do I do?
Yeah.
And
then also, okay, I'm balancing her right now. So, but at the same time, I grew up with his spiritual experience.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the other side. I came across a quote by, I think it was actually C.S. Lewis, who said that the heart cannot delight in what your mind rejects as false. And that's where I was. My heart stopped delighting in what my mind was saying. Well, I'm in my astronomy and my philosophy and in my biology classes, and I don't know how this works with the Bible. Does science contradict? So I had to go the other way and say, well, I have all these questions. If Jesus didn't rise, I don't want to waste my time. If he didn't raise from the dead, and I think if anybody raises from the dead and they were really dead, that's a pretty good indication that you should probably listen to what Jesus said. Right? So, and that's kind of the way I went. So in that, I think the couple has to be open, especially if you're dating, but if you are married, open your mind up a little bit and embrace the questions.
Yeah.
I think questioning is good. Doubt toward faith. If you can. Like, there are so many good reasons, but sometimes for fear of finding out answers that aren't good, or maybe they read only from one side, well, read both. I know a lot of people who read a lot of newspapers and watch a lot of stuff online that's very antithetical to belief and spirituality.
So, or vice versa. A lot of Christians are so hesitant to read the other side because they're like, is my faith going to get stripped away? But that can strengthen you if you're doubting toward faith. We have a whole bookshelf full of we have the Book of Mormon. We've got the Atheist Plan for da-da-da. We've got all sorts
Quran.
The Quran. We have all that because we want to know what's all out there,
right?
And why do we believe what we believe? Why have we chosen what we've chosen? And so don't be afraid to figure out, to ask questions and to doubt toward faith and figure out what's out there.
Right. Yeah. I would love, that's so awesome. I love that you're open-minded in that way and that you're, because we are complex people. Our family of origin, our histories, they're so complex.
Shared experience, individual and shared experience.
Yeah, that we can't just I don't know. I just love that that's your energy around it. I think that that's so, so helpful. So I want to ask, what are some spiritual, what was the question? Ask the card deck one again.
Okay, so the one from the realizations deck. Do you want to grab the deck? What
was it like? What spiritual experience?
Yeah. So what
was a landmark?
So the realizations deck is you're quizzing each other on your spouse, your partner's experience. So it's like, how well do you know your partner? So
it's kind of a game.
So it's kind of a game. So Melanie, you would answer this question, and then it provides a platform for Seth to kind of clarify. So you would answer, what is a landmark spiritual experience that Seth has had? And so you could just see if you can get it right, and then he'll kind of fill in the gaps.
What if I can't get it right?
You might.
What if I don't know one?
And it might be very different from yours, so try to think outside your box.
I don't know if I know one. Give me a hint. Can you give me a hint?
Well, so there's no way that you can know them because we just have had no reason to talk about it. Because like one was when I was like 16 in
one.
church. One was when we were going through.
No, I know one.
Okay, okay.
One was, and maybe, when you did, so we are, okay, this is going to sound so out of place for a second. I'm Native American. I look as white as a daisy, but I'm really not. It's a facade. But really, my grandmother was raised on a reservation. We work in Native country. So Seth has run Sweat Lodge before. Which is like the little like
it's a
dome
traditional
thing, and you bury it out and you put a hot rock in there and steam it. Right. It's like a sauna. And I do know that you had a spiritual experience where it was like stars inside of it, and you were like tripping. But it was like great.
It was a very meditative experience, like connection to God, not in really anything in a way that I grew up with. My mom and grandma are also Native. And I didn't grow up that way. I grew up more Christian, right? But this experience was like, oh my gosh, this is so real. There is like, God is here in a very different way, right? But then also had very powerful.
Wait. So then that was my answer. So then what's the second part? He has to fill in the details? What was it?
Correct. Yeah. So he would say, yeah, you're right. I did have that experience and here's more of that detail. Or actually, this experience was more of a landmark spiritual experience for me. I wouldn't say that one was it.
Cool.
Okay. So another one was when we were going through the really hard times where like, she gave me a black eye. I thought she was going to kill me, all this stuff. I had nothing left. Right. I was like, okay, I can't lean on my own understanding right now. God, what is it? And I remember being in our old house.
I pushed you towards the Lord. You're welcome.
I guess so. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mel. You're awesome. No. And I was just on my face crying. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning. I was like, there is nothing. I have nothing. God, please come down. And it wasn't like a voice from God or anything, but just a really strong knowing you're okay. You're okay. And I was like, oh, so that was a very powerful spiritual experience for you. I know that you became a Christian when you were 19 and just kind of like changed all of your stuff. And like you went from very, okay, I can do whatever to not like super black and white rigid, but like, I'm not doing that thing anymore. Right. There's no benefit in that. There's no fruit in that. I'm going towards this fruit. And that was a very powerful experience for you. Yeah.
That was huge for me. I think the one that stands out the most, though, that is going to sound super trippy, which I don't share that often, is when your mom, okay, so side story. When we first got engaged, his mom was not digging it. She did not appreciate me. I think at the time I had a shaved head, so I could see why. Like covered in tattoos, and shaved
tattoos,
head,
right.
Whatever. From a different part of the world. You still got the tattoos,
though.
Yeah. So she called me on the phone and like ripped me a new one. She let me know every which way from Sunday how terrible I was. And in that moment, I was like, what am I going to do? And I felt this presence of like a divine, I always say that this way, it was a divine moment where God gave me the exact thing I needed to say. And I told, in the most kind way ever, I was like, this is our moment to really shine. Like you can love him as a mother and I can love him as a wife. And we can like make his life great by honoring our different roles in this way. And then the crazy part about that was that I sent her that email. I sent an email after she called me. The second I hit send, it was like a demon was behind me. And this is not how I live. I'm not like, oh yeah, demons are everywhere. Everybody's sure, whatever. It was like the fear and evil was just like right behind me. And I remember being so afraid. I've never had an experience like that before or since, thankfully. And I called Seth and we just prayed. And we essentially like, and that was sort of my first clue, which again, this will sound super weird, but I feel like the devil is after our marriage nonstop. I feel like he just does not want this thing to succeed, because if he can tear our marriage apart, our ministry is gone. Guys, we can't help any more couples. If
and
he
our
can,
kids are affected, and the impact of divorce.
Right? Yes,
and
their
that's
kids.
spiritual warfare. People think spiritual warfare is like this woo-woo thing that we can't tap into. Like, no, what you're describing right now, the devil wants to wreck our marriages. Like, that's spiritual warfare,
right?
And every day we engage in that.
Yeah, I'm glad that I didn't even think to say it that way, which is weird. I've heard spiritual warfare a million times and like never applied it to our own spiritual stuff. But yeah, that for me is a really huge moment that was sort of almost like codifying, like I need to fight extra hard because I do feel like there is a sort of a war going on. But what are experiences that you guys have had? I'd love to hear them.
Sure. Yeah. But by the way, I just want to say that probably strengthened your marriage big time because you were engaged. It was very pivotal, it's foundational. And you guys came together, you called him. And then when you guys hit rock bottom a couple years later, what did Seth know to do to strengthen your marriage? He prayed with you 5 times a day.
That's right.
That's right. And we go back to what we know, right? Again, talking about family of origin. And sometimes we go back to those maladaptive, non-helpful patterns and reactions because we learned it from a family of origin. I've always done this way kind of thing. But when we can go back to like,
lean on your faith.
Lean on your faith, lean on that
higher.
I don't know. Sometimes I call it like inner knowing. Of course, if we, Christians believe, okay, well, God lives here, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, like our inner knowing and God puts certain wisdom in us and stuff that we can lean back on. So that's a very good point.
Totally.
But, I know that we've been talking a lot, and I feel guilty. It's like we're interviewing them. So so you guys tell us a little bit about a strengthening spiritual experience that both of you had individually.
Yeah,
sure. That's what therapists tend to do.
I know,
talk. Just bounce the mic back and forth. Yeah. So for me, so we both grew up in church, and this is one of those examples of like we grew up in the same even denomination, and so you could look at us. We're both white. You could think like, oh, we probably don't have any family of origin differences, but we so do. And so, I grew up I had a very Pentecostal upbringing and so received the Holy Spirit when I was 6 years old. And I still remember that moment. It was in Oregon, actually. And I remember that moment. I remember where I was standing, and I remember it was such a pivotal moment where like the Spirit of God entered me, and I was never the same, even though I was 6. But when you're 6, you don't have all the life experience to accompany the spiritual maturity that you have when you have, deeper pivotal moments with God later. And so, it was when we were dating. So I had actually grown up in a very so my family is very, very healthy in terms of, like the basics that you would measure in a healthy family. And, but the church that I grew up in, we found out later that that pastor actually went to prison, for child molestation. And it was just, there was so much brokenness around that. Yeah. Thankfully we weren't impacted directly, but obviously growing up under that pastor, like there was a lot of, impact, indirectly. And so, and that was right before we started dating. And so I had this season of brokenness around that, grief around that. And grief, by the way, just from a therapeutic perspective, can lead to so much spiritual health. If you can grieve well, allow yourself the space to grieve, because your spirit, your mind, and your body are all connected. And so when you can allow yourself that space to grieve, that emotional cathartic experience can lead to spiritual health if you lean in toward your support system. So I leaned in toward my support system, and Adam became part of that support system. And that season of grief for me was so healing and a very huge spiritual experience in my life.
Right. Wow.
Awesome.
Well said. For me, so I had the same early experience with the Holy Ghost that Chris is talking about when I was 8 or 7. I remember everything too. But then, of course, my wandering in my mind later on in my life, I remember sitting outside my one of my philosophy classes in my car, because I was at that time working with a full-time. I think I was taking like 22 units that semester. So I was quite full-time. And I remember sitting outside on my way. I was a few minutes early, and the whole time I'm an audio learner. So I read, obviously, but I listen to a lot of like debates. I listen to a lot of lectures. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I'm a consumer, I guess, in that. But I remember listening to Gary Habermas on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I remember there was a time where, because I was pretty settled that God existed because of a lot of previous studies. But I remember listening to that and just crying after the realization of like the full evidential weight was like all in front of me, and is like, wow, Jesus resurrected. And I always remember just crying and feeling like God's Spirit just come in that car. And that was a powerful moment for me because I needed that. I needed that cornerstone to work from. I'm a very much like, if I believe something, then I believe it. But I want really good evidence for it. And so that was probably one of the most impactful moments for me. I mean, I've been healed. I've had stuff like that. But of course, you can look back and go, well, that could have just been like, taking a sugar pill there.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's what my mind says. Like just to justify and give God a little bit of credit here. Like I tore my meniscus and I got an MRI like a week before that. And a guy was like, oh, your legs hurt? Can I pray for it? I'm like, okay, fine. Sure. Go ahead. He prayed for my knee and then I was fine.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So
pretty incredible.
It's incredible. So like, but it says that just shall walk by faith. And, faith is active trust. And I think when you walk in trust, it's active trust, right? When you're walking in that belief and trust and trusting in God to show you the way, you begin to interact with the miraculous. And I think that's what happens all throughout my life. I can give you lots of examples, but that was probably a cornerstone in my life.
Yeah. So I can clearly see the weight and the power and the gravity that just holds to both of you individually. And then, again, that galvanizing experience, and then how that also ties into what your guys' shared vision is for your marriage. You're like, okay, this is the pinnacle.
Yes.
When stuff hits the fan, this is what we go to. Right. So let's lean on that, not look at each other and get upset or hurt or all kinds of stuff. But I want to be aware of your guys' time as well. But if you could talk maybe just briefly about how you guys see this play out in coaching and what really kind of is your sweet spot when you are talking to couples for both of you.
Yeah. Well, our favorite place that this plays out in coaching started with our own story. So Dear Young Married Couple was birthed on a backpacking trip. And we feel God so much. I mean, we feel God in prayer at our home. We feel God at church, but we feel God so much when we are in the mountains because that's where the general revelation speaks. So in theology, there's the special revelation, which is what we get in scripture. And then there's general revelation, which is what we see God in his creation.
I think that's why there's a lot of spirituality. Like it's hard to say that there's nothing when you look at the universe, when you look at how wonderfully we're made.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, we feel God so much when we are on a backpacking trip, when we're hiking together and we brainstorm and it's like you just have this supernatural surge.
And we get rid of the phones.
Yes.
Like you get rid of a lot of the
noise.
distractions, the noise.
So our favorite way to implement this in coaching is on our 2-on-2 intensives. When we bring couples out into the woods, and we call it a Jeep retreat, but a lot of it's the backpacking. It's the, sitting in hammocks around the fire and like talking about the dreams, the goals, the healing work that needs to be done. And God is a part of that, the central part of that. And so that's, I think, our favorite place to see it. But we also implement the value system and spiritual experience in our coaching.
Like everybody has that finely tuned ear for their area of genius. And so whenever I hear people thinking, I try to be a safe place for people to question and think.
Yeah.
And everybody makes sense when you hear their story. So I like to try to hear their story and hear where they're coming from. And maybe there's a tidbit of knowledge or a book or something that I can help them with their walk. Because everybody's at a different place and you can't ram any truth or anything down people's throats. So so just being there for them to hear them and be a safe place for them to talk it through and be a soundboard for them. I think that's where what I love doing.
Right.
And we pray with our couples in session. It's a big part of what we do. A lot of times we're closing in prayer, and it kind of just gives a obviously we give homework and we give action items and practical things, but capping it with that spiritual experience, even just in session, kind of gives them a launching point spiritually of like, okay, I'm motivated, I'm encouraged, let's go do this. There's a spirit of unity in the couple too.
That's amazing. So actually that ties in perfectly. Why don't you tell our listeners like where they should look for your stuff, what stuff you have out there and all of that. Just share more about what you do and what they should go look at.
Sure. Yeah. So you can find our website, dearyoungmarriedcouple.com. We also have a podcast, Dear Young Married Couple, and we have an Instagram, Facebook, Dear Young Married Couple. We found a while back that there was a gap in resources when it comes to conversations that couples need to be having, whether they're dating, engaged, married. And so we actually created resources a couple years ago called Foundations and Sexpectations. And so our Foundations deck is a teaching deck, but it's a deck of 52 cards, each card with a question for the couple to ask about the relationship. So it's for dating and married couples. And so it asks questions about your communication styles, your conflict resolution, your family of origin, sex and intimacy, finances,
roles
leisure,
and responsibilities. Yeah,
it's great.
And yeah, it's each card has a question, but then it also has a tip at the bottom of the card or a studies show, and really gives them the opportunity to grow in that area. And then Sexpectations is all about your sex life and your sexuality in general. And
the gap here, there's plenty of stuff on sex, but a lot of it didn't line up with, well, I would say our beliefs, but really the research.
Right.
It was encouraging things that weren't beneficial for a marriage. And so we're like, this could be, we want to help in that area.
Yeah.
So making couples talk about areas that need to be talked about, but in a healthy way that's backed up by research.
And two of the big things that we heard in terms of feedback, because now so the card decks are on Amazon. We've sold thousands and thousands of decks now in the last couple years, but one of the big pieces of feedback that we heard, especially in those first couple months when it came out, was these are questions I never knew I needed to ask. And it's making a huge impact on our marriage, our sex life. But then a second piece of feedback is these are questions I've always had that I wanted to ask my spouse, but I just didn't know how. And I didn't know
without
when.
making it awkward.
Making it weird. And so this gives them an opportunity to do that because the question's right there on the deck.
Right.
So people will ask the questions on road trips. They'll ask the questions, they'll just put it in their nightstand, maybe ask a card or two throughout the week. And so it's then we came out with realizations the following year, which is specifically for dating couples, but married couples can do it too. And it's how well do you know your partner? Preparing them for marriage, making sure they understand and know a lot about their partner.
Well, no, we spend a lot of time in that deck on kind of on the personal, but on like values and goals and where are you going? Do you want to link up with this person? Are you going in the same direction? And
back to that shared value.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? Like really determining that and becoming aware not only for yourself, but how my shared value interacts with hers and how we can make it
and lines
better.
up or not. Right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And I love that you use research as your one of the foundations, and like that is the line up with the research. Because if we're lining it up with culture, it ain't gonna help our marriage.
Right.
It's probably gonna harm it. But this has been awesome. We love you guys. This has just been some amazing conversation, and it feels like the beginnings of really great more conversations that we should be having.
Yes.
So our listeners, go check them out, see what they're doing, go to their websites. We'll link everything. And we just are so thankful for you guys for joining us.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Guys.
All right, guys. It's been fun. Talk to you later.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.